Okay, hello. My name is Robert Hill. I'm the host for today's ESCoE webinar. Um, so today's speaker is Silvia Lui of the ONS Data Science Campus. She's also affiliated with ESCoE. The title of her presentation or the paper is Measuring Subjective Wellbeing, Evidence from the UK Household Longitudinal Study. Now, just before she starts, the format is that she'll speak for between about 40 and 45 minutes, and then there'll be a Q&A session after that. So if you want to ask a question, please post your questions in the Q&A box. The one other thing I just need to say is this webinar is being recorded. Okay, so over to you, Silvia. Thanks.
Thank you for the introduction, Robert. Let me just share my screen with you. Can everyone see my screen? Just to double check. Right, so thank you everyone for coming to today's seminar. So today I'd like to share some of the results of a recent piece of research that I conducted with Anna Rinken-Asna from NISERT. And
sorry, Sylvia, we can't see your screen.
Sorry, I do not know what's happening. Let me just do it again. What about now? What about now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so let me see. Okay. Right, so again, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you for Robert's introduction. So I'm Silvia Lui. I'm from the Data Science Campus at the Office for National Statistics. So today I'd like to share with you some findings from a recent piece of research that I have conducted with Anna Rinken-Asna from NISERT and ESCoE. So we've changed the title of the paper slightly, but it's still the same thing. So the piece of research we've conducted is called Deriving New Measures of Subjective Wellbeing using the UK Household Longitudinal Study. So this is a very new topic to both me and Anna, quite different from the kind of topics that we usually work on. So obviously we find it really interesting, but at the same time, there's also a lot of things that we're still learning and we still need to improve. So any of your suggestion, your comment and your advice is going to be really helpful for us. So let me just give you a brief introduction. So improving well-being and the standard of living across the UK is a very important policy agenda. And recently, the focus has been put on reducing disparities. So as we know that well-being and productivity are closely related, while productivity is important in achieving higher level of prosperity, but there are also other social outcomes that needs to be considered to understand well-being. Those who have worked on the topic knows that measuring well-being is very challenging because it is very difficult to quantify the well-being experience. So the need to better understand how well-being varies across UK and across time, and the need to have better measure to quantify well-being to inform policy prompts us to carry out our study. So our piece of work has three main aims. The first one, we want to draw a constant picture of changes in subjective well-being over time using longitudinal survey data. By doing that, we can offer new evidence that cannot be reviewed using annual snapshots produced by other types of surveys which are not in longitudinal nature. We also aim to provide detailed breakdown of well-being trends in the UK and UK regions. So by doing that, we hope to provide useful information for policymakers who are interested in regional disparities in the quality of life. We also explore a method to quantify categorical well-being responses, accounting for the impact of individual-specific and regional factors. And we believe by doing that, then the resulting the resulting summary measures will be more informative as compared to simple aggregation implied by most of the existing study. So this slide here shows you the research questions we aim to answer. First of all, we want to know how do responses to different well-being metrics relate to each other. And secondly, we want to know what's the most important drivers of well-being. And we also want to know how does the trend of different well-being metrics change over time. And finally, how can one obtain weights that account for heterogeneity in individuals' well-being experience in response to a set of observable factors. So now let me just give you some information about the data that we use. So we use the UK Household Longitudinal Study, which is also known as the Understanding Society. It's a longitudinal survey that asks questions to members of about 40,000 households in the UK. The survey started in 2009, 2010, and it followed from the British Household Panel Survey. It currently has a total of 12 waves, and the survey asks a comprehensive set of questions that covers different aspects of subjective well-being as compared to other existing UK surveys. So the fieldwork period is about 24 months, with those interviews that couldn't be conducted were followed up within a few months later. So let me just give you some information about our analysis sample. We use 10 waves of responses to the individual questionnaire. So for wave 10, it covers the interview years 2018 to the mid of 2020. We focus on the ordinary sample members from the surveys, who are the people that are followed through the life of the study. So from the survey, we create an unbalanced panel, which basically contain all the ordinary sample members who gave valid answers to all the research questions we considered. And then from the unbalanced panel, we constructed a balanced panel, which basically include all the individuals who has responded to all 10 waves. So there are about 7,321 individuals in total. Now, as I mentioned before, we want to do the analysis both at the national level and also at the regional level. So, however, when we look at the breakdown at the regional level, we realize that the number of observations by region are reduced significantly. So we worry that it will hinder valid inferences on any regional analysis. So therefore, we use both the unbalanced panel and the balanced panel for national analysis, but we also only focus on the unbalanced panel for the regional analysis. So now let me give you some more information about the respondent level data set that we use for analysis. It includes subjective well-being variables. So what you can see on this slide are the 12 subjective well-being variables we have taken from the survey, which basically comes from the 12 general health question. And this question asks respondents' experience in different aspects of subjective well-being, and respondents are required to give categorical response. So we recode the well-being variables in the sense that high values means higher well-being. And we also reduce 4 categories into 3 for simplicity by combining them into 2 categories. So this table here basically just shows you the subjective well-being questions in the survey. So it asks respondents, for example, about, their experience, in the recent experience of concentration, whether they have recently experienced loss of sleep, losing confidence, for example, and whether their recent experience in terms of enjoying day-to-day activity. Now, one thing I want to point out is that the 12 question, one of the 12 general health questions asked the respondents about general happiness. Now, lots of existing study focus on using general happiness as an indication of overall subjective well-being. But using this survey, we can actually examine whether using general happiness is sufficient in indicating overall well-being experiences. So we also take from the survey information about which region the respondent locates. So the variables is named government office region. So government office region is roughly equivalent to the ITL level 1. So the table here basically just shows you the 12 regions we consider. So in the individual in the respondent level data set, we also include a set of what we call them individual factors, which we believe has an impact on individuals' well-being experience. So these set of factors covers, for example, demographic characteristics, household condition, employment and income, whether the respondent has caring responsibility, how much time the person spends on caring the others, and physical health condition and location, in the sense that whether the respondent lives in urban area or not. So we also include a couple of regional factors, which we believe can be related to individuals' well-being experience. So we use ONS data at the ITL level 1. So the two regional factors we consider are the gross disposable household income per head. So this gives indication about regional economic welfare. And the other one is the gross value added per hour. So it gives information about regional productivity. So we basically just merge the regional factors to the respondent level data set according to the year in which an interview was conducted. So this slide here basically just gives you a brief idea of how many, the interview years that are covered in each wave. So most interviews are conducted in the first 24 months, but the majority of them, with the majority of them being conducted in the first 12 months. So of course, we need to use some tools to help us to find answers to our research questions. So now let me just talk you through the methods that we use. So we use the polygoric correlation to examine pairwise relationship between among the 12 different well-being metrics. So polygoric correlation is first proposed by Oslo back in 1979. It's based on contingency table. It measures the level of agreement between two normally distributed continuous latent variables with observed ordinal values. So the interpretation of the polygoric correlation coefficient is pretty similar to the Pearson correlation. So polygoric correlation coefficient has the value between 0 and plus and minus 1, with 0 meaning no correlation and plus and minus 1 meaning perfect correlation, whether it's positive or negative. So we believe the results from our polygoric correlation analysis will inform us about how the different metrics relate to each other unconditionally. But it will also show us some evidence of whether there exists a possible unobserved common factors that underlies subjective well-being. Because if that is the case, then we do expect to see the correlation coefficients, the value of the correlation coefficients to be quite high. So we also model a relationship between a subjective well-being experience and a set of observable factors. So we used ordered probit model to do this. So these slides and the next one basically just shows you the general setup of the ordered probit model. So I'm not going to go into too much detail into it. But basically, the basic assumption of this is that we assume that there is a latent variable, namely YITK, with the asterisk, which triggered, this is the latent variable, it triggers respondent I's responses to a particular well-being question K in wave T. And then, so what we've got here, YITK without the star is what we observed. So we also assume that the latent variable, which means that the well-being experience is related to a set of individual factors and the regional factors. So regional factors, we denote it with XIT, and the regional factors, we denote it with ZRT. And then it's related, so these factors are related to the individual's well-being experiences. So what you've got at the bottom of this slide is basically showing the relationship, in a mathematical form. So it's an ordered probit model. It's probit because there is assumption of the error follow a standard normal distribution. So this slide here basically just shows you how the conditional probability is of observing a particular categorical outcome is computed. And so we have some unknown parameters here, which are the threshold, denoted as mu, and the coefficients on the individual factors and the coefficients on the regional factors. And then these unknown parameters can be estimated using maximum likelihood. So at the bottom here, I'm just showing you the likelihood function. So before I move on to talk about other methods, I want to point out that we estimate the pooled national and regional ordered probability model with only the individual factors to examine the drivers of subjective well-being, because we include dummies and for regions and wave in the pool regressions. But we estimate respondent level ordered probability models with individual factors and regional factors through and using the outcome of the estimation at the estimation output, we obtain ways to adjust summary measures of well-being to account for heterogeneity. So we use the balanced statistics to quantify qualitative response on reported well-being. Balanced statistics are widely used to summarize survey-based economic sentiment. So what you can see in the middle of this slide are basically how we compute the proportions of positive experience, neutral or no change experience, and negative experience. So the balanced statistics is basically just the difference between the positive proportion and the negative proportion. So how do we adjust for heterogeneity? So first of all, we suspect that there's some sort of like differences among respondents' well-being experience due to different individual characteristics and also differences in regional economic condition. So if this kind of heterogeneity exists, then we think that the aggregation methods should consider the relevance of these differences to ensure that the resulting summary measures are informative. So in our research, we demonstrate a way to create summary measure of well-being. Now, we can't claim that this is, there are many ways to say that this, to do aggregation. We can't claim that this is the only way, and we can't claim that this is a perfect way. But we think that the way we're doing, the way we propose is simple to use, and it also offers some sort of meaningful interpretation. So we basically just give more weights to respondents whose well-being outcomes are closely associated with socio-economic factors and regional economic conditions. So by doing this, we believe the resulting aggregates should better reflect the direct or indirect influence of policy via the correlations with the observable factors. So let me just give you a bit more example of how we compute the adjusted summary measures. So we estimate order probit, including both the individual factors and the regional factors for each respondent in the balanced panel for each of the well-being outcomes. So we estimate 7,321 ordered probit model for each of the 12 subjective well-being measures. And then from there, we obtain pseudo R-squared to construct weights. Now, R-squared is usually used to indicate goodness of fit, but it also reflects the amount of variation in the dependent variable explained by a set of covariates together. So we believe if we use this pseudo R-squared, construct weights, then this weight would take into account the collective impact of individual factors and regional factors on well-being experience of respondents. So what you can see in the middle is how we compute the weighted balanced statistics of a particular subjective well-being metrics. And so what we do is basically we weight the individual responses. So what you can see in the middle of the equation WI. So I explained at the bottom of this slide that it is the weight assigned to respondent I is the rescaled pseudo R-squared from respondent I's ordered probit model, such that the sum of the weights equals to unity. So in the previous method, I talk about we assigning weights to those respondents whose well-being is more closely related to the observables. But obviously, there's an alternative way to do things. we think that an alternative way to do the adjustment would be to assign more weights to the respondents whose well-being experience are less correlated with the social economic factors and the regional economic condition, meaning we assign more weights to those individuals whose ordered probability models give a lower pseudo R-squared. So if we do this, then we believe the resulting aggregates are less correlated with observables that could be influenced directly or indirectly by current policy. So therefore, it would be more informative about the level of well-being which current policy do not have an impact on. So we think that both ways of aggregation can be considered. But when in the result that I showed you later, we basically just demonstrate one way, which is when we assign more weights to individuals whose well-being experience is more closely related to the observable factors. So we also try to summarize the sentiment, the measures, the summary measures of all 12 well-being metrics into one. So we do this by using composite index. So since we don't have apparently good reason to believe that one well-being metric is more important than the other in determining overall well-being experience, so what we do is that we assign equal weights to each of the well-being metrics. So the composite index is basically computed as rescaling the series of average standardized balanced statistics of the well-being metrics to an index value with mean equals to 100 and standard deviation equals 10. So we compute the composite index with and without adjustment for heterogeneity. So now let me just share with you some of the findings we've obtained. So what you can see on the slides on the right-hand side is a heat map. It shows the polygoric correlation coefficients, the heat map of a polygoric correlation coefficient. So to give you a bit of an idea how to read this heat map, so a larger dot with darker color indicates a larger value of the polygoric correlation coefficient. So the smaller one, so the smaller dot and the and with lighter color means that the correlation between the two metrics is well-being metrics are not so high. So if you take a look at this heat map, you will realize that, like we do not, most of the time we don't observe, very high correlation among the pairwise correlation among the 12 well-being metrics. So we found that correlations range between 0.3 and 0.8. I think the largest correlation we observe is the correlation between confidence and the feeling of self-worth. That's probably not very surprising. And then if we look at the average across 12 metrics, then the average correlation is about 0.54. Now, we also, if we look at the average of one well-being metrics, with all the other 11 aspects, well-being aspects, we find that actually general happiness has an average of 0.54, correlation of 0.54 with all the other 11 well-being metrics. So looking at these results, we can we think there are two implications. First of all, different aspects of well-being could be driven by different factors, because we do not constantly always observe very high correlation. And secondly, we also do not see that general happiness has a really, really high average correlation with the rest of the 11 well-being aspect. So we think that, what implies is that any surveys that aims to use a consensus of happiness as a measure of overall well-being could risk missing important aspect. So now, in terms of drivers of subjective well-being, we look at factors that are linked to the probability of observing a particular outcome. So we use the marginal effects we derive from the ordered probability estimation results to understand the magnitude of the effects emerging from the ordered probability regressions. So the sub-bullet here basically just give you, how the marginal effect is interpreted, but we have a lot of results. So I think I can only just give you a summary of what we have found. So first of all, so the summary findings of the drivers of subjective well-being. First of all, we find that men are more likely to score high in all 12 aspects of well-being. I think Anna can come in to correct me later on, but I remember that this is not quite what the other literature has found. I think other literature probably has found women experience a high level of subjective of well-being in general. Secondly, we also find that being married or in a partnership increases the likelihood of scoring high in most aspects of well-being. Having a degree is associated with a higher probability of scoring lower generally across all aspects of well-being, except for the ability to play a useful role. People of Black ethnicity and those come from an Asian origin tend to score higher in the majority of well-being measures. Being migrant is associated with a high probability of scoring higher in well-being, but the effect is small. We found that older individuals are more likely to report a better concentration, more able to overcome difficulties, more positive feelings of confidence and self-worth, but they are less likely to feel that they can play a useful role, less capable of making decisions, and to enjoy day-to-day activities. But these effects are small. We also find that having a job is associated with scoring lower in many aspects of well-being, except for the ability of playing a useful role and feelings of confidence and self-worth. Higher income is mostly associated with higher level of well-being in several aspects, but the effect of the size of the effects can be small. High income is also associated with feelings of being constantly under strain. Those respondents who owned their house outright are more likely to score higher in well-being, and those who live in urban areas are more likely to report worse well-being compared to those living in rural area, but the differences are quite small. The relationship between health and well-being we found is the strongest among the drivers considered. Those with excellent health are up to 30% more likely to report higher subjective well-being. That's probably not a very surprising result. So in terms of what we found when we from the summary measure we created. So this chart here shows you the plot of the balance statistics of the well-being measures, the unadjusted one. So before we adjust for heterogeneity. So what you've got here in the solid line are the balance statistics we derived from the balance panel, and what you can see in the dashed line are the ones that we derived from the unbalanced panel. So the main message from this chart are that the trend of well-being of the balance statistics shows a decline in most well-being metrics since wave 6. So wave 6 covers interview year 2014, 15, and 16. So in other words, the declines, we find the declines in well-being started since 2014 in most metrics. So this here I showed you the chart of the composite measure of subjective well-being. So the solid line is the one we derived from the balance panel, and the dashed line is the one we derived from the unbalanced panel. So the main message from we can draw from this chart is that the overall level of subjective well-being has declined in the UK since year 2014. So this is probably not very surprising given what we've seen in the previous chart. But there's something that I wanted to point out is that the difference between the composite index we derive from the balance panel and the unbalanced panel is not very different. Yeah, so they follow the same trend. So maybe we can claim that the balance panel represents the unbalanced panel quite well. Another thing I also wanted to say is that from our study, we find that the decline is since 2014. This is not quite consistent with some previous results from other survey in which a more recent decline is observed. So now, let me show you, before I show you some results after we adjust for the summary measure for heterogeneity. So this slide here basically just show you some information of like that the kind of like steps or the kind of method we need to use when we do the adjustment because of some kind of concerns that we encounter. So again, we estimate 7,321 respondent level ordered probit model using data from the balance panel to obtain pseudo R-squared to construct weights. We have to use a smaller scale ordered probit model with fewer explanatory variables for adjustment, meaning we contain fewer individual factors. So the decision is based on one, the findings, our findings when we look at the drivers of well-being, the findings in the literature, and also the concerns of result accuracy, because we only have 10-time observations for each respondent, so we cannot actually include too many variables on the right-hand side of the order probit model. So we consider two parsimonial representation of the order probit model with less regressor. So, so model 1 is the one that include the two regional factors and personal income. Model 2 is the one that include two regional factors and health. So, of course, larger scale respondent level order probit model can be used if we have more time observations. For example, if we extend the data set to include those who also participated in the British Household Panel Survey. So this chart here basically just shows you the standardized balance of balance statistics of the well-being measures. So what you can see on this chart, the one with the line with the pink color is the one that we compute using weights obtained from model 1, which include personal income, and the line in blue is the one that we compute using weight obtained from model 2, which includes health. So the main message from this chart is that we observed similar decreasing trend in the adjusted balance statistics of well-being since 2014, but more variation before then. So the differences between the adjusted and unadjusted series are not very large, but there are some year-on-year variations. So just to remind you that we are restricted by short sample periods, so we cannot use a very sophisticated models to do adjustment, but maybe if we have longer time series and we can include more individual factors on the right-hand side of the respondent level ordered probit, then we might be able to see larger differences. So this chart here basically just shows you this composite measure with adjustment. So model 1 and model 2. So, and then we have it, we benchmark it with the unadjusted composite measure. So the main message from this chart is that the overall trend of adjusted measure is broadly similar, but some of the annual changes are larger. So now let me just move on to give you some major findings from the UK regions. We have a lot of charts and a lot of tables, so it's impossible to show all of them to you. So we can only just provide some main findings, summarize some main findings that which I'm going to talk you through. So the findings from the unconditional correlation, meaning from the polygoric correlation analysis at the regional level show a consistent picture with the national level results. So parallel correlations between different well-being metrics do not vary much across region. Only in a few cases, we find the correlation coefficients have value greater than 0.7. It further confirms that the evidence of a common factor underlying the 12 different metrics is not very strong. So in terms of drivers of subjective well-being, we find that being divorced or separated is associated with lower probability of positive well-being outcomes in regions such as Northwest, Northeast, and Northern Ireland. Divorced or separated individuals in London do not necessarily report lower level of well-being, in contrast to what is observed in the majority of other regions. Respondents with a degree are more likely to feel that they can play a useful role in most regions, but the link to other aspects of well-being is less clear. Respondents of Black ethnicity are more likely to score high in well-being in London and in the east of England, but not in other regions. We also observe a stronger relationship between income and the likelihood of higher well-being in London and West Midlands. So this slide here shows you the composite measure of well-being across of the 12 UK regions. So, and then we benchmark it with the UK aggregate using the dashed line. So the main message from this chart is that the regional composite measures of well-being follows similar trend as the UK as a whole. So we observe some regional differences in the pattern of the balance statistics of the 12 well-being metrics, but these differences do not translate into major regional differences when we aggregate the 12 well-being measures. So to conclude, we explore the use of individual data on self-reported well-being experience to construct national and regional well-being summary measures for the UK. We investigate the drivers of well-being, focusing on a set of individual specific factors. We illustrate how one could obtain weights to produce aggregate well-being summary measures that accounts for heterogeneity. Our findings from the category correlation analysis confirms that well-being is a complex concept and cannot be easily represented by a common factor. Relationship between different well-being variables appears quite similar across regions, but there are some regional variations in the extent to which some individual socio-demographic factors impact on well-being. So we find overall decreasing level of well-being in the UK since 2014 at the national level and in most regions. We do not observe a unique pattern of changes across all aspects of well-being, but there are similarities. For example, we observe different timings when the decline started. Our analysis provides a range of results that look at differences in the aspect of well-being and in different regions, as well as showing changes over time. And we believe that our finding can be informative for policymakers who are interested in understanding regional disparity in the quality of life. Now, before I finish, let me just talk about some caveats, some limitations, and what we think future research can focus on. So we have not examined the reason that caused changes in the trend of well-being. Our weighted analysis assumed all individuals are being affected by the same set of individual and regional factors. We think that this is actually a testable assumption and may not be true across all respondents. Our weighting scheme assigned those whose well-being that are less correlated or orthogonal to observable factors with a small or zero weights. We use parsimonious specification to construct weights to adjust for heterogeneity, but the models can be enriched if we have longer respondent level time series. So in terms of future research, we think one could consider extending the data to include those from the British Household Panel Survey to obtain longer respondent level time series. This would be particularly useful if we want to do adjustment for heterogeneity. We illustrate only one way to obtain weights, but there are also other ways of aggregation. So future work could consider, for example, giving more weights to the respondents whose well-being is less correlated with observable, which means that more correlated with some sort of unobservable factors. This will allow one to capture the part of well-being that is more random and not so closely related to socio-economic and regional factors. Future work could also explore changes in subjective well-being during pandemic to understand whether there are any changes in their drivers. So this is the end of my presentation. So I'm very happy to take questions, and I would also like to invite Anna to join, my co-author Anna, to join in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Silvia, for a very nice presentation. So there are now two questions in the question and answer box. I also have a couple of questions myself, but let's take the questions that were posted first. So Joe Grice, would you like to read out or state your question, please?
Thank you very much. I mean, the first thing I'd say is very nice, systematic setting out of what's been done. The methodology struck me as being admirable. So I very much enjoyed the presentation and the underlying work. The question in my mind is, you give good reasons why a single measure of well-being, stroke happiness, may well be misleading and doesn't really have any proper theoretical basis. On the other hand, one of the problems that this work with well-being has had is gaining traction in the public debate. I mean, I was the director at ONS who introduced it back in 2010. 13 years later, I think the well-being data to date has had limited impact on public debate, rather less than we hoped it might do. Now, against that, you've got GDP in the national accounts every day, once a month, when ONS announces the new figures. Depending on the rest of the news agenda, those figures will dominate the debate for the day, and no well-being will get sort of no coverage at all. When the well-being information is produced, it'll be lucky to get something on page 5 of the media. One of the reasons for I think it's been difficult is that it's quite hard to present multi-headed measures. Once you've got a measure that says one aspect of well-being is going up, one aspect of well-being is sort of fluctuating around, a few other aspects going down, that's quite a difficult message for either the media or the policymakers to take into account. So the question at the back of my mind is there ways in which we can preserve the integrity of the analysis, but actually to present it in a way which makes it easier for it to be absorbed into the public debate? A single statistic would do that, but it would have the problems that you've drawn attention to in the work.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I do understand your concern. I mean, having worked at the ONS myself, and of course, like having easily interpret and informative statistics would be very helpful to inform policy. And this is precisely the reason why Anna and I started doing this piece of work, because we want to see whether it is possible to create a summary measure. But the more we look into it, the more we realize that actually well-being well-being is a very complex concept. So we have only just tried to make some sort of adjustment to say, as a start, could we at least first try to account for heterogeneity first across individuals, because just to make at least individual well-being metrics, the summary measure of individual well-being metrics, to be more informative. So this is the first step. Now, of course, like there are very different ways of you have correctly pointed out that the 12 different metrics can show different patterns. Yeah. Anna and I have not, at least I haven't put in like a lot of thought in terms of, okay, how we can make sure that a summary measure like the composite index, that summarizes the 12 well-being metrics, with some kind, retain this kind of like differences among the well-being among the trends in the 12 different well-being metrics, but at the same time being informative. I think the major problem is that if we were thinking at the beginning to see, can we weight individual well-being aspect, but the thing is, we really do not have a good reason to believe that like one metric is better than the other. So creating weights to make to improve the composite index is quite a challenge. I'm not sure, Anna, is there anything you want to say?
Sure. Maybe, yeah. So maybe we can think about like if so the majority of So the annual the APS survey that had kind of 4 summary questions on this, and they were mostly on anxiety. I think if I remember well, anxiety, general happiness, life satisfaction. But if we looked a bit in more detail at these 12 measures, they do uncover different aspects of what we can consider well-being. So some of them might be more linked to job and maybe more directly to productivity, because we have groups of variables talking about job satisfaction, playing a key role, decision making, being useful, and others are actually more difficult to pin down, like the general happiness. So, I mean, we maybe think of ways that we can group to capture these different aspects to what we might understand as well-being, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few more questions coming in there. So first one is Keshab Batara. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. This is very nice work. I have worked on the UK model using kind of general equilibrium, applied general equilibrium model to measure the well-being. So that is based on the utility evaluation in the general equilibrium framework. Now, your study provides a better micro foundation, including the all socio-economic and the other dimension. This is really very good aspect for me. Great learning. My query was, you mentioned that when I asked this question, you mentioned that answer to that question a bit in the last slide. Use the data sources from the ONS, Office of National Statistics. I mean, I'm interested to see the small version, mini version of the data if you have used, So, I mean, if you want, I can also share my, things to you. So that is it possible to get how did you construct that data? So that is my question.
Construct the
data that you used for the probit analysis. You have a index.
Yes. So I explained earlier.
So this index function, I believe, I was a bit late coming here, but the index function was kind of a sub function of the probit, isn't it, overall?
I'm not sure whether because you mentioned that you joined in a bit late, I'm not sure whether you have missed out the parts that I talk about the construction of the data.
Maybe. I mean, if you have a paper or that part, I mean, I would love to have that on.
Yeah, I mean, we should be publishing this paper soon, Anna, right? So, I mean, happy for you to get in contact, and then when the paper is published, we can share that with you.
Yeah, okay.
But we use, but in short, we use the UK household longitudinal study.
So, is it understanding society data set?
It is it's the same. Yeah, we call it understanding society as well. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So our next question is from Leo Sveikaukas, if I pronounce that not too badly, please. Well, okay, I can just read it as well. Oh, are you there? Yeah, okay, please. Can't hear you. Okay, in that case, I'll just read the question, and if you're able to come in later, you can. If you want to elaborate, you can. So the question is: can you use your data on the effects of income and health to understand the consumer value of health?
I have not thought about this actually. What do you think, Anna?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
I'll repeat it. Can you use your data on the effects of income and health to understand the consumer value of health?
So I think we might need to think about that, because
I think we need to think about it. We have not thought about it at all.
This is only telling us how health translates in the higher probability or lower probability of having higher or lower subjective well-being. So sorry, if you don't mind, we might have to think about, or maybe spell a bit more in what context you would like this question to be answered for.
Sorry, Robert, is consumer utility you mean, or consumer value?
It said consumer value of health.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that. Consumer values in terms of what? Sorry.
Okay, well, let's go on to the next one. And if Leah's able to come in later, to elaborate, he still can. So the next one is from Sigden.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentation, Silvia. It was very informative, and to Anna too for the great work. My question is, your results, if I haven't read it wrongly, your results seem to suggest that having a job has a negative association with subjective well-being. And this seems quite counterintuitive. And there are many studies using understanding society and finding the opposite. Do you have any explanation for this result?
Yes, I think I might come in, Silvia, here.
Okay.
Yeah, so we totally agree with you. We thought that was counterintuitive and also contrary to what we have found from reading the literature. So one of the key drivers of subjective well-being, according to the literature, there are two mains. One is health, and we found the same, and we agree. And another is job situation. So basically, being unemployed decreases your well-being, especially for the long-term unemployed. So explanations to this, the results are not too strong, but they seem to be statistically significant. I think we may think about, if we think about well-being in general, it makes no sense. But I think here we are talking about other aspects of well-being in terms of like stress, anxiety, that kind of thing. So I think there is only one variable which we see the sign that we expect is playing a key role. So I think here we probably need to be a bit careful trying to explain each of the relationships, because well-being as a whole, we agree is a bit strange, the result. But I mean, when we look at other things more related to your job and what you do in your job and the demands that you have in your job, maybe they have a better explanation.
I think we find the job associated to not too low level of well-being when it comes to feeling of confidence and self-worth, right?
As well. So we might have to be a bit more closely at the different relationship to be able to explain more carefully, if that makes sense. But
thank you. That makes sense, because when I saw the results saying that it's also negatively correlated to happiness, I was a bit surprised. But also it may be the case that you cover the entire population and perhaps not the working age population. So that might be another reason, or the weights you use might also matter. But that was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so the next question is from Daniel Das.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Hi. Mine actually wasn't a question. It was a potential response on the previous, not the last question, but the question before, on the consumer value of health or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. I was just going to mention that there is, for the person who asked the question, that there's quite a big subjective well-being valuation literature, basically, which is a non-market valuation technique used to put monetary values on things like health or family relations, social relations, lots of things, using the marginal rate of substitution between income and the subjective well-being measure and whatever the thing is that you're trying to value and the subjective well-being measure. If you do a search on Google Scholar, or it's also in the Green Book, the Treasury's Green Book mentions it. You can find like some information on it.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. Very useful information. Maybe Anna and I can take a look at that, and then also think of like whether it's possible to use the data that we use to look at this aspect. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so next is Asafa Basabrin.
Yes, hello. Thank you for this presentation. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm interested in studying the effect of subjective well-being measures on spending behavior, and I wonder I might have missed that in your explanation, but I wonder if you have studied life satisfaction measures like satisfaction with income, satisfaction with leisure time, and its relationship to the other subjective well-being measures. Thank you.
No, we haven't considered that yet, but that's something that we can consider, right, Anna?
We do have income. I think we do have income.
No, we have income, but I think the lady was asking about not spending, right?
No. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's income satisfaction, job satisfaction, and leisure time satisfaction. So I'm studying the effect, the impact of these subjective well-being measures on life satisfaction measures on spending behavior. So that's why I was wondering if you have mentioned that. I will study that.
I'm not sure whether the survey gives us information about spending behavior and that kind of thing, but we only look at the 12 subjective well-being metrics that we're considering. We have not looked at any questions that asked about income satisfaction. I can't remember whether ESCoE has covered income satisfaction. Do you remember, Anna?
I don't think so, but I wouldn't be able to say. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's all right. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the questions, one or two still coming in, but I just want to get in a question myself before we go on. Although we're running out of time, having said that, I just want, just a comment actually. Two things. One is that the Kahneman and Deaton have a paper in 2010 in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, which looks at these different concepts of happiness. And it might be interesting to relate, this concept of general happiness that you have with their two concepts, where one is kind of everyday happiness as you feel it now, and the other is a more sort of reflective life evaluation measure. So so it'll be interesting to link to at least discuss how your work relates to theirs. I mean, particularly I think your measure is more like the everyday happiness, and they say for the US that peaks in 2010, peaked at $75,000. After that, it was flat. So that also raises a possibility of kind of non-linearities in your regressors, which can affect the interpretation of those coefficients. And also, continuing on the theme of Deaton, I mean, Case and Deaton in their book Depths of Despair are emphasizing that people without college degrees in America are doing a lot worse in terms of life expectancy and presumably happiness than people with college degrees. So I was struck by your results that a college degree seemed to lower your level of happiness, general happiness. So again, of course, this is UK versus US data, but anyway, I thought that would maybe also be an interesting angle to discuss.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Robert, for the comment. Very helpful.
We can fit, there's one here from Jessica. Do you want to ask? We're almost out of time, but do you quickly want to ask that?
Jessica can't have a microphone on.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just read it then. Okay. So it says from Jessica Mahoney, more of a comment than a question, but the 12 questions used have here make up the general health questionnaire. In creating your composite SWB measure, it could be useful to consider existing recommendations for scoring the GHQ-12, which has been validated in general, plus clinical populations, particularly against depression and anxiety disorders. So it goes on, hang on, just got to scroll down a bit. Okay, separately, as a comment, the implication that the drivers of different aspects of SWB are distinct from one another is very interesting and potentially problematic from a policy perspective. I wonder whether it would be possible for future extensions of this type of work to try to do something similar with the ONS4 life satisfaction, the ONS4 brackets life satisfaction, happy, anxious, feel life is worthwhile. So that's just the statements. Question.
Okay.
There is one study that looks at that using the annual population survey. It's a study at the regional level, focusing on Wales. It's by Blackaby et al. And then so so we found some commonalities with the results, but the main difference in the result is the result on unemployment. So they also look at a lower level of regional disaggregation in Wales, so you may want to look at that one as well. That's from 2012, I think.
Okay, there's one final question here from Xiao Ying. I'll just read it. It says, the heterogeneity of the SWB is for what means? Is it for the aggregation of the SWB metrics?
Sorry, the heterogeneity, sorry, I missed that.
I'll just read it again, but the heterogeneity of the SWB is for what means? Is it for the aggregation of the SWB metrics?
No, it's the heterogeneity of how individuals' well-being experience, responds to a set of individual specific characteristics and also regional factors. So we take this into account when we, when we do the adjustment for the summary measure. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're out of time for today's webinar. So thank you everyone for your participation, and particularly Silvia for a very interesting talk. So the final thing I just need to do is advertise the next ESCoE webinar. So the next one is entitled Measuring Human Capital in the UK Economic Accounts, an Experimental Satellite Account, which will be presented by Robert Dunn of ONS, and that will be 2 weeks today at the same time. Okay, thank you. So that's everything for today. Yeah,
Thank you
and goodbye.
Bye-bye.